It's very, I didn't mention it because I didn't think it was going to affect it. It was just going really slowly, like a pendulum. Okay, everybody. Thank you. So I'm Hannah Miyamoto, and I would like to present about the issue of international recognition and California independence. I'm presuming that as you know, when you get discussions about California independence, a lot of people just tend to focus on just what would happen between California and the United States, or what would happen between, within the United States, California, and not recognizing the importance of foreign relations, meaning relations with other countries in the United States of America. So, beg your pardon offhand, right off the beginning, I'm going to say that I'm going to be very, very basic, at least start from very, very basic principles. And hopefully after this, you'll have an understanding of why international issues are, in fact, a crucial part of our planning for, or should be a crucial part of our planning for organizing for the cause of California independence and liberation of same. So the three topics we have are very simple. What is international recognition of a state? So I'm going to assume you don't know what that actually means. If later on, please hold your questions. We'll ask those afterwards. How do states become recognized internationally? And finally, of course, how can California achieve international recognition? Literally. First one, think about it a little bit. There's a concept called states. Sometimes called countries or nations or whatever, but in international law terms, there's only states. And these are basically governments that have land and coastal waters. That's what, obviously, yeah, they have territory, and some of it has to be land to be a state. And they hold a monopoly on force and violence within its territory. In other words, as we all know, only the police in California, right? Only the local police are able to shoot people, right? Not you or me. As a general rule, and not also people of other countries can go out and enforce the laws. So, because violence is the ultimate capability of a police force. In the same way, the military is the ultimate. Is of course, the military is the same thing. So that no other military can operate inside the territory of the United States of America without the cooperation, at least, of the United States of American government, right? So that's what it is. Okay, but that's a very crucial point. That's a definition. States that holds a monopoly on force and violence within its territory. And then they're called failed states are the ones that don't have a monopoly of violence. That's when there's a guerrilla army out there, or there's a breakaway state, or something like that. Two other concepts. Under United Nations Charter, which was originally enacted in 1945, national borders may not be changed and new states may not be created from the territory of existing states except by mutual consent. That means that secession movements are, as a general rule, illegal under international law. But then there's two. Except colonized peoples. Because remember, in 1945, most of the world's people were in colonies. Actually, India was a colony. Most of Africa was almost entirely in colonies, etc. Right? I mean, South America is probably the only non-Western country that wasn't under it was actually largely independent. And so it said colonized people have a right to self-determination. They can form new states, which is how we get 175 states today, as opposed to just I think less than 100 states in 1945. There's two kinds of independence. De jure is by right. That means you're recognized by most major influential states. That's the independence you think of when you think of a national independence. Whether government is independent. But then there's independence by fact, which means that you have a local government and it's functioning reasonably well, but the state is not recognized by major states. The great example of this is Taiwan. Taiwan is certainly a government. It actually has a monopoly on force within its territory, but it's not recognized by major states because ever since about 1972, it's been officially considered no longer representing China. So the government there is now de facto independent. Even though I might point out, the United States of America still maintains a mutual defense pact with Taiwan. So a attack on Taiwan would lead to a war with the United States. And the United States Navy particularly emphasizes that regularly by passing ships between the coast of China and Taiwan, just to show them that we can. All right, states gain recognitions through, how do the states get recognitions? Well, the main thing is obviously establish a government. Well, without a government, you can't have, and that means a government that provides functions, not just passing laws, but also public services. It'd be a postal delivery, a police force, national defense. Those are some of the minimum things you'd have to have in order to have a state. And then you're recognized by influential states as a state, not just any old state. There's several governments, like Transnistria is a good example. There's around the border of Russia, the Russian Federation, are a bunch of little states which nobody recognizes but Russia. And they're breakaway pieces of other ones, like I think Transnistria, it's breakaway from Moldova. Nagorno-Karabakh, I think, is a breakaway from Georgia.
Is inside Azerbaijan.
Azerbaijan, okay.
And Armenia, only Armenia recognizes as part of Armenia.
Right. So you get the picture.
Republic of Northern Cyprus.
Right. So those are examples of states that aren't given general, but they're not generally recognized. So I'm going to give you two examples of that from history that you probably might be familiar with. That of two states that one of them that got international recognition and one that didn't. One of them is the United States of America, which, if you didn't know, became internationally recognized between 1776 and 1783, when Great Britain gained recognition. And the Confederate States of America, they failed, and this is why. Let's start with the Confederates. The Confederates were formed in December 1860, right after the election of Abraham Lincoln. One early example of if you didn't know that, the Confederate States of America tried to conduct diplomacy with foreign countries almost immediately. And that led to the Trent Affair. What happened was the United States Navy was blockading the southern coast, and they stopped a British merchant ship that was carrying a couple of passengers who were these diplomats from the Confederate States. And the United States took them off the ship, let the ship go by. Great Britain was extremely upset. People in the newspapers particularly, there was some talk about an actual war breaking out between the USA and Great Britain. And the United States was forced to back down and let go of these people. And they were allowed to continue on to England. And as I said, one war at a time was what Lincoln said at the time, and knowing that even though the Confederate States of America were not federally recognized, were not internationally recognized by any other country, at least they would not be. They could not. The United States could not stop neutral ships. In this case, Great Britain. However, on the other side, British shipyards were actually able to build both blockade-running ships as well as even warships. In case you're wondering, they had everything but the guns. And then the guns came from some other place. And there were like at least 3 warships, the Confederates, that did nothing but sail around the globe, cutting down American ships and capturing them. The Shenandoah went all over the Pacific Ocean, capturing whaling ships. The joke, in the Navy slang is there's a USS Never Sail. Well, in the CSA, you were the Ever Sail, or the Forever Sail. Anyways, but let's not forget, the European states, let's explain that the European states did not fear the United States of America as far as recognizing Confederacy. They were able to recognize Confederacy. They weren't afraid of a war with the United States of America. The United States had no ability to do anything really substantial against any of the countries, especially Great Britain, especially as long as Great Britain was was not on the side of the USA. France, whatever there was of Germany wasn't unified yet. You know what I mean? Sweden, Norway, Spain, Portugal. none of those countries were going to, the Netherlands had a pretty sizable fleet. None of those states were going to be able to do anything about it if those other countries did recognize the Confederacy. But here's the point. They all knew what the Confederacy was fighting for. And I think it's very interesting, even to this day, apologists for the Confederacy like to claim that the war was not about slavery. It was about states' rights or something, right? Nobody was fooled. There's no way European countries, which themselves had abolished slavery or never had it, were going to endorse a country who's built on slavery, whose only reason to exist was to maintain slavery, against the wishes of another country that was opposed to it. And that was just never going to happen. So we forget that. I'm going to say briefly that this is why I say that I do believe that other countries would recognize California, because they know what we stand for. We stand for what they stand for, as opposed to the opposite. That's why you just can't just say, well, I thought we had a civil war. You can't secede from the Union. I would contend that the Civil War experience doesn't apply that directly to our situation, because we are not fighting for something like enslaving 4 million people of a particular race. In fact, yes. Now, did you ever think about how the United States of America became a country? We all think of George Washington and those brave soldiers and stuff, right? In fact, literally the month after the shooting started, the Second Continental Congress formed a committee secretly to communicate with foreign governments and supporters in foreign countries. And as early as March 1776, now that's, remember, 4 months before the Declaration of Independence, the United States actually sent its first diplomat, who was, by the way, named Silas Deane, in case you want to have a trivia contest. He was the first American diplomat sent to a foreign country to start making arrangements and presenting the position of the Americans to the Europeans. Remember, it says in the Declaration of Independence, right, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind, right? It's literally saying this is why, not just that we are independent, but here I'll explain to you why we've done this. Now, the American Revolution got French support first, and it happened for two very funny ways. On the one hand, you had liberals and radicals who were just intrigued and maybe inspired by the American Revolution because, of course, no people had ever had ever picked up arms and waged war and then declared themselves a new country, right? Kings had been threatened in wars before, but they'd never been threatened by somebody creating a whole nother country, right? If you think about it, that was pretty novel to them. And the other one was, frankly, if you were Spain, if you were concerned about the French or Spanish kingdom, and you remember them, well, your natural enemy was Great Britain itself. And so by supporting the United States, in other words, we were a proxy war. By supporting the United States, it would hope they could weaken Great Britain and thus elevate. Fun fact, of course, France particularly weakened itself so badly by supporting the United States of America that the French Revolution almost came directly because of the French government supporting the United States of America. Well, thank you, France. So yes, think about that. February 1778, that's just, 8 months after the Declaration of Independence, France signed a military alliance treaty with the USA. And also Spain was giving military assistance. So that meant General Washington was getting weapons, particularly rifles, guns, smuggled into the country and using them to shoot British soldiers. And then, as we all know from our history books, the Battle of Yorktown was decisively won because the French Navy, which was the second largest fleet on the globe, appeared off the shores of Virginia and prevented the rescue of General Cornwallis, at least before. The British Navy wasn't going to, long story, but it was instrumental. It would not have been. And that was, of course, the decisive battle that ended all the fighting at first. After that, after 1781, all there was left to do was negotiate the peace treaty between Great Britain and now the United States of America. Which, the Treaty of Paris, that's where it was, don't forget it was negotiated in Paris for some reason. The Treaty of Paris, actually, Great Britain recognizes the USA. Okay, so there's your take-home lessons. Okay, when a state, they have to recognize a state when it just simply obviously exists and it can't be denied, or when it serves their interest. And the example I would give you is that the United States of America did not recognize the Soviet Union until 1933. That was at least 11 years after it was established, and by that time it had already been pretty much peaceful, because Roosevelt thought it would be good for, he actually thought it'd be good for USA, be good for our trade. He also was concerned about things like Germany and Japan, and thought that Russia was a strong natural opponent of those countries, and therefore, so he had. You see how it's all there, right? I mean, on the one hand, we can't deny that Soviet Union is in power. On the other hand, hey, it's good for us too somehow, and whether it's economics or political or geopolitical or military, there's some reason to do it. All right. Again, you all know this. Remember what I said about de facto independence, right? If all independence means is you have a government of your own, and you're not under the authority of another government, then California is de facto independent when it's invaded. Because we all know that Pio Pico was the last governor of California under called Mexican rule, right? Except for the fact that he was not appointed by Mexico. So under Mexican law, he had no authority whatsoever. He was appointed by the people of California. He was elected by the people of California. His authority drew entirely from the people of California, had basically nothing to do with Mexico. And on top of everything else, Mexico didn't have any soldiers in California. We're not even sure. So we're not even sure if there were any Mexican soldiers. I certainly have found any evidence that there were a single soldier of any kind, and certainly no major formations. So California was on its own. It was as de facto, as independent as Taiwan. Now, remember what I said, too, that if it was a colony of the United States, then I would contend that she has a right that continues to this day to be self-determination and independence because of it's as a colony. We're not breaking away from the United States of America if we never were supposed to be part of the United States in the first place. Therefore, the real point is, the Republican Party has become a white supremacy party. They literally have done the trifecta: racism, xenophobia, and religious intolerance. The three things that break up countries, and they have built their party and their appeal of their party entirely around those three things. The world will support the liberation of California if we choose to liberate ourselves. And I certainly think we can certainly find out pretty quickly. It's, we are living in the internet age, right? I mean, we don't have to send foreign diplomats in secret, in secret missions, behind the lines. They're going to know right away what we're thinking, and they're going to be able to express themselves about it.
I think it's the U.S. that should be, by the international community, say that you're not a state anymore because you're against everything we stand for. That would be
logical. Right. And if it weren't for the United States' enormous military power, that's exactly what would happen. When you think about it, right? Also, United States, Russia has enormous military power. The United States has both economic, cultural, and military power. Right. Let's be honest. But I'm going to actually hit to that point just very shortly. So, if you didn't know, since 2017, which of course, almost immediately after Donald Trump was elected, and they realized this guy isn't kidding. All that stuff on the campaign trail, that's really what he's thinking, or at least that's what he's saying. And so the governments of Germany, France, Canada, Japan, and other leading liberal states, they've been searching for ways to restore their security. Germany, France, Canada, and Japan formed an alliance called Alliance for Multilateralism, and they launched it in September of this year. And but even before that, I was surprised to find Canada, particularly under Premier Trudeau, have literally been running around South America and Central America, building up an alliance that's basically directed at the United States government. historically, remember, at least since Roosevelt, the United States of America was the leader in the hemisphere. And I mean leader in the sense of leading a real, true alliance, not just simply, sending gunboats and, imposing rule, but actually under the good neighbor policy under Roosevelt, particularly, right? Here's Canada going around doing exactly the same thing, but it's actually directed clearly at the United States of America. And and there, I think that's the last word I'll say. The illegitimacy of America's invasion of California legitimizes the right of California to liberate itself from America. That would be my thesis.
So basically, what you're saying is that the argument, at least one of the best arguments, would be to say that California has the right to be independent because it was independent initially and it was taken over.
Right.
Basically.
Right. There was no. This is maybe I will start a fight by pointing out that you could have an argument that Hawaii was consensually incorporated in the United States of America. There's no argument that California was brought in became a state by consensus. It was invaded. On one fine day, one fine July day, it was invaded, and it was attacked on three sides.
And what is your take on, your opinion on that argument to the international community? Would that be a valid, like we were talking about the NATO and all that stuff, a valid argument for California to make to the international community that we were conquered basically, so we're a conquered state and we never were supposed to be. So can you review California's role as a state in the world?
I think I would say this, that we're working on two different levels. On the one hand, you have this vague, abstract right of sovereignty and independence because of colonization, under decolonization, right? And the other, you've got the self-interest of the states that we're talking about. That if Donald Trump is reelected, if the Democrats prove unable to slow things down, if the evidence of corruption between Russian Federation and the Trump administration, or what I like to call the Trump-McConnell gang, is too strong, etc. At some point, they would, and also I also remind you too that what goes on in this country, the United States of America, directly affects what goes on in Europe. That extremism in Europe, which has led to lots of violence and particularly against minorities and immigrants and things like that in Europe, has been inspired, in some cases funded by United States officials. So, look at what's going on right now with Ukraine. Remember, the people that Donald Trump tried to pressure were the people that Putin tried to prevent coming to power, right? So in other words, Trump is taking the side of the people that the Ukrainian people got rid of. I mean, how could obviously Ukraine is only a piece of Europe, but that's a hostile act no matter how you look at it, and of course on top of everything else, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which the United States helped found in 1947, which by the way includes Canada too, by the way, right? It literally is North Atlantic. But NATO, Trump routinely, every chance he gets, talks about how he'd like the United States to leave NATO. Yeah. And that's one thing for an American to say, but for the President of the United States to say it,
he's getting laughed at by the Europeans.
He may be getting laughed.
Is the result of that.
Let's say it this way. If all he was getting was laughter, I think it wouldn't be a factor. But he's getting a lot of concern. Right. And I said since 2017, he's raised a lot of concern. And so at a certain point, I have to think that, I'll put it this way. I think we need a governor of California who would actually be taking this country towards independence. I believe that if we elected somebody like that in 2022, I think that we would see how far. You know what I'm trying to say? That the analogy I'll make is something like, you know how mudslides happen, right? You get water underneath the dirt and it makes the whole thing slip at once. And I think it's the same sort of thing, that the pressure, the land is there, the forces are downwards, but needs something to edge it, make it go. And that would be the foreign involvement. That we get foreign support, it would then communicate back. I mean, just that little piece we had with Baja, right? We're all happy because you had a foreign leader saying, "Hey, this idea of California being away from, broken off from the USA, there might be some advantages to that." Right?
And so you're saying, I guess to summarize this, you're saying that the more the federal government becomes oppressive and pulls away from NATO, becomes the opposite of what NATO stands for, the more it goes towards that, that it's beneficial for us as far as independent California, because we are moving towards NATO, towards France, Germany,
Right.
democracies like that can identify with us, and they can no longer, just like we can't identify with the U.S., either can they. And so that's an advantage on the international.
Well, I think it also kind of made your point, though, in a way as well, is that it also tells us questions about what should we be going towards. We should be telling people, when people ask that question of what kind of country do you want, right? Well, the answer, I think, could be legitimate to say we want to be a country like European countries. We want something like the EU. Or EU type countries. And we all know what EU countries are, right? They're countries where the work week is between 35 and 38 hours a week. Everyone gets a week, a 4-week vacation. Of course, healthcare is universal. There's no national draft. I could go on, right? Those are the kind of, and maybe most importantly of all, is they have elections, and in the elections, the people that get elected actually have power.
Because it's by popular vote.
Right, it's not by, we don't have a state by state thingy, right? So, right, especially Great Britain being the greatest example, right? If you didn't know briefly, I mean, if you're elected to the House of Commons passes laws, and when the House of Commons has passed a law, that is it. The House of Lords is out there, and if you didn't know this, then, but the law is that, certainly any bill that I think the rule is that the most they can do is discuss, and maybe they can say that's a bad idea for a law, or you really should reconsider it, but they are totally an advisory body. And that's been the law of Great Britain since 1911. So they've been having a lot of experience with this system. And also in that system, the leader of the executive branch is the leader of the leader of the party that's in power, right? The prime minister. So there's no divided government in Great Britain. That government can get stuff done because as soon as the people have voted, they're great, and they can get stuff done. And then, of course, there's a system for having more than frequent elections as well. So something like, I'm trying to say is, and I think the more we talk like that, I think the more we can encourage Europeans to support California independence. So in other words, it's sort of, maybe it's channeling our energies. That's why I want to talk about foreign recognition and the importance of it. If we had foreign recognition, there's no doubt in my mind that we wouldn't have to worry about being invaded by the United States, because it'd be just like Soviet Union invading Hungary in 1956. It caused a lot of problems, and it certainly would cause enormous troubles for the United States, no matter what, even whether you don't But now I want to talk to you about this. Right? It's the fact that. We kept talking about what other things do we share with the Europeans and Japan and Korea and a bunch of other countries. But let's start with Great Britain. Don't forget Western Europe. Don't forget the European continent has 450 million people. It's actually there's a lot of people there. That's a lot to talk about with Europe. But yeah, consider this.
You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Greta. But when I heard that, my feeling was, if she's right, and a growing number of people in this world think she's right, that we are literally facing the question of whether the human race will survive. California independence starts to become a very small issue. Breaking up the United States becomes a very small issue. The question becomes, I mean, if that is what's necessary, if that will help the human race survive, I don't see how anyone can rightfully deny it. All that issues about, the founders wanted this or the 1776, it's all nice Yankee Doodle music as far as I'm concerned. If the human race is really at a crossroads of whether or not it's going to continue, then what are we waiting for, right? We know what the people of California would do if they didn't have the United States of America, and especially didn't have the federal court system above it. Oh, actually, too. And if they all, don't forget, Congress passes laws that preempt state government laws. So they've done it before, and they're going to do it more and more in the future. So that's the other ultimate reason. We can't even do our own part as to respond to an issue which literally is rising up from the surface, and threatens to inundate our own lands.
I think Europe is very aware of this now. That take on California and climate change. I mean, Jerry Brown went to China when Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords and made his own deal and stuff. So, and we've always been seen as eco. We've been fighting pollution for forever and everything. So I think that on the world stage, which, especially Europe, sees us as being part of that. So that's another thing that they can agree to be much more on our side than the U.S. because the U.S. is the biggest polluter. China's coming up also on that, but we're the biggest polluter, and it's saying now that it doesn't even believe in climate change.
Right, it doesn't believe in climate change.
Yeah,
When
when all of Europe and scientists are saying, yeah, we agree. So what do they have in common anymore with the U.S.? Basically, it's pulling away everything away from the European value system, democratic system that we once had in this country.
Well, and I point out that, well, what the governor of California, what the state legislature does, is going to be challenged in the federal system. As long as we remain American state, we're going to be governed by the federal court system and the federal and what the laws of the federal government. If we're independent, we're on our own, and we can do what we like, right. And we can do what we think is best. Which I think I put it better. Not that we can do what we like, we think what's best. And frankly, we would have a lot of advice coming from our friends in Europe and Japan and Asia to tell us what they think is best. Yeah. So, and that's the only way we're going to solve climate change, right? The only way we're going to face the challenge is by working together. It's not a problem where you can just, close down a brickyard or put catalytic converters on cars, right, like has been, because climate change is global. And let's not forget, for over 40 years, as far as I can tell, the United States of America has been opposed to serious action on climate change. You can go back to the Reagan administration and you can see the United States diplomats. Even under Obama, they could not take extreme positions because of politics in our country. And really, that really means the money power in our country. So, and now if you didn't know, November 4, 2019, the Trump administration made the irrevocable step to, in fact, withdraw from the climate change accords after about 2 years of debate. And by November 4, 2020, the United States of America will no longer be compliant with, Paris Accords. That means even those are only 25% reduction in greenhouse gas production. That's probably not enough. I mean, the dirty truth is, even the world has only adopted what they think is achievable, not necessarily what is probably necessary. We have no idea what's actually necessary to prevent massive climate change that's destructive to even human civilization, much less the natural environment.
And let's not forget also that just recently, the administration has ruled to get rid of our emission in California, our emission standards, which we've established over 3 decades, reduced our own pollution, and these guys want to roll it back and take it out. So that goes to the point of the preemptive federal government
Exactly.
telling us what to do.
Right, and it's obviously, I think if there's anything we should be doing, frankly, in the California liberation movement, is we should be educating people on exactly what that Constitution actually means, rather than giving people a whole lot of bugle oil about how it's the founder, it's the foundation of our rights and blah blah blah. It puts California and other states under the thumb of Congress, and under the thumb, and then not just Congress, the federal government in general, which unfortunately is an anti-democratic institution. But the last thing I want to remind you is the fact that why the U.S. allies are not just concerned about climate change. They're concerned about climate change because they know that everything else about peace in the world is related to climate change. Already we're seeing mass migration, civil wars breaking out, specifically over people fighting over resources that are diminishing because the climate is changing, is causing massive droughts or maybe massive flooding, and that sort of thing. And that is a process that's just going to go extreme. And ultimately, if there were and again, the Pentagon has said that climate change is the greatest threat to global stability and the prevention of the Third World War. So now we're talking the Third World War. We still have, the United States and Russia still have thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction on top of that. We don't know how many chemical weapons and biological weapons, although that Novichok thing that they used in Great Britain to kill that one guy shows signs that Russia still has a very serious chemical weapons capability, and that we are, that's also very, very developed. And so, now you have to think to yourself, if it's, if the stakes are this high, then we need to point that out. But the stakes are so high that we have to think about changing the relationship that has been existing between California and the United States since 1850. So, you've already gone it over. Those are conclusions, right? Yes, we can. Does that sound familiar? Yes, we can attain foreign recognition by convincing friendly states that encourage CalLib, serves their interests. And the United States government is doing right now is negatively affecting the peace and security of European states in particular. And again, climate change is going to drive that even further because that creates new pressures. But still, the fact is you've got a Republican Party that encourages racism and xenophobia and religious intolerance, and other governments, other political leaders in other countries, like Hungary is a great example, and Germany, they use support, whether it's, they all talk to each other, basically, right? If nothing else, I might remind you that in Germany, it is illegal to display a swastika. We have a First Amendment, hooray, which does allow us to display swastikas, and so they use the media from the United States of America in order to promote Nazism in Germany. Again, don't know. I think it's probably the Germans have gone too far on that one because I don't think they've, it's not the symbol, but they're a sovereign state and they went through obviously the experience that's horrific and the like. But the point is that when Trump talks about immigrants and things like that, they go and say, look what they're doing in the USA. And of course, then that's the other problem, the fact that the people in Europe think that what American government does is generally a reasonable thing, no matter how unreasonable it is. So our cause is the cause of Europe and Asia and other regions, especially Europe and Asia, because those have the most economic capacity. And that's the conclusion of my presentation today. A lot of great conversation already. We'll look forward to having a full discussion now. Thank you very much.